What's up guys, Pete here and welcome back to the show. Today we've got another sponsored knife review, again by the company Kubey. This time we'll be looking at their EDC Multitool knife. As always, let's start with some of the specifications of the knife, starting with this very interesting kind of razzle, kind of utility knife shaped blade here. The blade is 2.5 inches long. The handle, which appears to be anodized aluminum, is 3.5 inches long. It has some additional features as per the Multitool moniker. It has this little insert here that allows it to be a socket wrench, so 4, 6, 8, and 10 millimeter bolt head sizes there. And it also has this glass breaker on the other end. And then it does have a pocket clip that is currently set up for right side tip down carry. However, it is reversible, tip up, tip down. It is not, however, reversible for left hand carry. And it does have this very nice tubed lanyard hole. Now let's talk about this knife as a knife first and foremost, and then we'll talk about the multi-tool aspect in a moment. Now as a knife, this performs very, very well. Let's start with the blade. It's a very interesting blade shape, but it's also very utilitarian, which is very important to me. There are a lot of blade shapes out there that are very interesting, very aesthetically pleasing, but they just don't cut that well. Not the case. First and foremost, this is very, very sharp, which is incredibly important and disappointingly overlooked in some of the more budget knives. You'll have an interesting look at knife, but it just won't cut, which is kind of pointless to me. Fortunately, not the case here. Very, very sharp out of the box. Now, this blade shape is very interesting. It's kind of, razzle shaped, if any of you guys are familiar with that kind of blade shape. You do have kind of a Tonto style here where you've got a sub tip, which is very useful for certain cutting tasks. So if you wanted to get down and kind of cut into a package, which I'm not going to do because I like this little table mat here, it's very useful for that. So cutting into clamshells and things like that. It's also very useful as a scraper. This is kind of a chisel ground shape to it, which means that there's just one bevel all the way down on this side, and then it comes to another bevel here. So it's kind of Scandi ground, kind of chisel. It's confusing. But it means it's an excellent scraper for, scraping tasks, which is nice to see. You don't see that too often on knives, but it is nice to have. Overall, as a knife, this performs very, very well. Deployment is very smooth, though I will admit it takes a little getting used to with this kind of thumb plate here. It is kind of weirdly shaped, and it did have a very heavy detent at first, which made it a little difficult to flip out, but after a little bit of practice and a little bit of breaking in, it deploys just fine. As a knife, it performs very, very well, very utilitarian, which is very important to me and a lot of other people as well. Now let's talk about those multi-tool aspects real quick. The most obvious is going to be this little wrench set here. Personally, I've never found a huge use for these kinds of things just because A, I very rarely need to be turning bolts, and B, if I do, very rarely would this actually help me. Simply because this requires a lot of open space. If you had a bolt sticking out the side of something, then yeah, you could absolutely use this. But more often than not, it's a bolt in a weird kind of place that you need a pair of pliers to get into or a proper set of wrenches. That being said, however, the way that it's implemented here doesn't detract from the rest of the knife. When you start putting stuff on the handle, you run the risk of making it uncomfortable to grip. Not the case here. You don't even really notice it when it's there. If I'd held it with my eyes closed, I wouldn't notice that it was there. Very important for me that if you're going to add things to a knife, especially on the handle, that it's not going to detract from the overall, appeal of the knife. And fortunately, it doesn't. It doesn't detract from the aesthetics, and it doesn't detract from the functionality. And for those few cases where this might come in handy, it might be nice to have it. Now, the last thing is that glass breaker, which we're all familiar with glass breakers. It's hard to make a bad one. I'm not sure what material this is, but it seems like maybe tungsten carbide or something to that effect. It is very, very hard. I did check. It's hard enough to cut glass, which is not an easy task to do. So that'll stay nice and sharp for a very long time and will absolutely be able to shatter glass. So as an overall kind of rescue tool, this knife would be certainly capable of extricating you from a vehicle. First, cutting yourself out of the seatbelt, and then lastly, removing, a window or windshield, what have you, in order to get yourself out. So as a possible rescue knife, definitely a nice little tool to have. Again, not a huge fan of the cutout on the side for the socket wrench, but that's just because I don't personally have a huge use for it. That doesn't mean that you might not. Now that pretty much covers everything that I want to talk about with this knife. I do think that it's a very interesting offering from Kubey. It's very, very sharp out of the box, which is very important to me. It's very utilitarian blade shape, which is also important to me. Now, I personally carry a multi-tool as well as a normal knife, but for someone who wants to kind of combine those and compact their carry, just lighten up their pockets as they were, this is a very nice little option to look into. It deploys very smoothly, it's a nice looking knife overall, and it certainly has some added functionality that you don't get with your standard pocket knife. So with that being said, guys, I think that covers everything I wanted to talk about. Another excellent offering from Kubey as always. I'll have a link down in the description for their Amazon page below. As always, guys, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate having you here. Feel free to like, subscribe, and comment down below if you have any questions about this knife or anything else on my channel. And as always, guys, keep your edges sharp and your mind sharper, and I'll see you in the next one.